All right, boys and girls, welcome back to my study of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is Hayden Schaap. I'm just doing a daily study of 7 Habits, which has for me been the most impactful book that I've read and sought to implement in my life outside of the key books of my faith. And really what I think why it's so impactful to me, it's the book that's brought me the most, upon implementing the things in it, have brought me the most insane results in terms of money, but that's not been important at all, except for to say that it's given me the ability to a framework to define what makes a meaningful life and how to actually achieve the things that you want, that are most impactful, that give you the most meaning and happiness, joy, peace, knowing that you're building a life off of true principles and how to actually do that, what that means, how to do it, the framework to do it, the lens through which you should view the world in order to do it. It's been really impactful for me. So following Stephen Covey's counsel, I'm trying to study with the intent to teach. And my hope is that as I study with the intent to teach, that it already is doing this, but giving me new insights in how to align my life with true principles in order to gain the things that I would like, have the impact that I would like, and have the contribution and the meaningful contribution that I would like in the world. Okay, so we're going to get into this. We left off talking a little bit about the circle of influence versus circle of control, and we're going to talk now about how to expand your circle of influence, like what that actually takes to expand your circle of influence, your ability to influence and be a proactive person within the things in your life that you most care about. Okay, so just to recap this last line I really like from our study yesterday: changing our habits, changing our methods of influence, and changing the way we see our no control problems are all within our circle of influence. So this is how do we get within the circle of influence. And the thing that I learned yesterday was that there's our life can be, the problems that we experience in our life, the problems especially that come from not being a proactive person, can be categorized into 3 things. The first set of problems or type of problems are direct control problems. Things that if you took responsibility of them, you could directly control the outcomes. The second type of problems that we face in our life, that we can solve by being proactive, are indirect control problems. So anytime, this is a problem that always involves another person. Anytime you're dealing with other individuals, the way that you gain control over those types of problems is through persuasion and influence. And there's different methods of how to control these types of problems. But the third type of problem that we face in life is a no control problem, things that we have no influence over. And people that focus on no control problems, the weather, government, politics, things like that, they relinquish their ability to control the direct control problems and their ability to see how to persuade people within their indirect control problems. That's a more complicated way of stating that there's always a solution to the most pressing problems that we face in our life, and the way to solve them is different based off of what type of problem it is. Okay, so now as we go into how do you expand your circle of influence, because the essence of proactivity is being able to have influence over your life in a way that aligns you with your personal vision for what matters most to you, right? And hopefully that alignment is off of true principles, off of the foundation, the center of true principles, which is where truth or principle-centered living is born. Expanding the circle of influence. It's inspiring to realize that in choosing our response to circumstances, we powerfully affect our circumstances, which is fascinating. I love that idea. When we change one part of the chemical formula, we change the nature of the results. It's hard to pick up one end of the stick without also picking up the other. It's hard to pick up the consequence. It's hard to make a choice without picking up the consequence of that choice. So we're always doing that, right? We're always making choices that have consequences. It just is a matter of what consequences we want. I worked with one organization for several years that was headed by a very dynamic person. He could read trends. He was creative, talented, capable, and brilliant, and everyone knew it. But he had a very dictatorial style of management. He tended to treat people like gophers. Go for this, go for that. The net effect was that he alienated almost the entire executive team surrounding him. They would gather in the corridors and complain to each other about him. Their discussion was all very sophisticated, very articulate, as if they were trying to help the situation. But they did it endlessly, absolving themselves of the responsibility in the name of the president's weaknesses. I see this a lot when I coach really talented young salespeople who maybe have a manager that they might not perfectly align with, even in their values, but also just in their style and method of management. And so they'll talk endlessly about the problems, but then do nothing about them. They won't. They relinquish. This is what I love about what Covey is saying here, is they did it endlessly. So they would talk about these problems in a way that seemed like articulate, and they were dissecting them and understanding them. But they absolved themselves of the responsibility in the name of the weaknesses of the person. And this is what happens is and you see this with people who go to a church, right? They might go to the church and then either stop attending that church in the name of the weaknesses of other people, absolving themselves of their own ability to function within the teachings of that church or gain or benefit from being proactive within those teachings in the name of the weaknesses of another individual. It's really sad, I think. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so you couldn't imagine what's happened this time, someone would say. The other went into the department, had everything all laid out. He came in and gave totally different signals, blah, blah, blah. They're complaining about him, right? And Covey's just pointing out how they complained about him. But one of the executives was proactive. So this owner of this company had alienated all the executives except for one was proactive. He took the initiative. He anticipated. He emphasized. He read the situation. Fascinating. He was not blind to the president's weaknesses, but instead of criticizing them, he would compensate for them. Gosh. Where the president was weak in his style, he tried to buffer his own people and make such weaknesses irrelevant. And that's actually the advice that I give when someone comes to me and has qualms about a leader that they work with is listen, I could go change your circumstance and make it so you aren't working with that leader anymore. But instead, if I did that, I would actually absolve you of the thing you would learn from absolving you of your responsibility to actually function and gain from the strengths of that individual and thereby help you actually become a better leader yourself. It's interesting how this person that Covey's describing did the exact opposite of absolving himself of his own responsibility and ability to influence the outcomes. Where the president was weak in his style, he tried to buffer his own people and make such weaknesses irrelevant. Yeah, so really proactive people are able to make the weaknesses of the people they work with around them irrelevant. And he'd work with the president's strengths, his vision, talent, creativity. This man focused on his circle of influence. His own circle of influence, right? He was treated like a gopher also, but he would do more than what was expected. He anticipated the president's needs. He read with empathy the president's underlying concern. So when he presented information, he also gave his analysis and his recommendations based off of that analysis. As I sat one day with the president in an advisory capacity, he said, "Stephen, I just can't believe what this man has done. He's not only given me the information I requested, but he's provided additional information that's exactly what we needed. He even gave me his analysis of it in terms of my deepest concerns and a list of my recommendations, of his recommendations. The recommendations are consistent with the analysis, and the analysis is consistent with the data. He's remarkable. What a relief not to have to worry about this part of my business." Gosh, that's interesting. At the next meeting, it was go for this, go for that, to all the executives but one. To this man, it was, "What's your opinion?" His circle of influence had grown. This caused quite a stir in the organization. The reactive minds of the executive corridors began shooting their vindictive ammunition at this proactive man. This is so fascinating. I see this happening right before my eyes in some of the situations for me in one of the organizations that I work in. It's the nature of reactive, and I've seen this many times in church and community service and in other organizations as well, school, businesses, things like that. It's the nature of reactive people to absolve themselves of responsibility. That really becomes my question to First and foremost to myself is, what things am I complaining about in my own life that I'm absolving myself of my own ability to change those circumstances by complaining about them? And I think that's actually why I really truly like loathe and despise negativity in general, is because by complaining, we absolve ourselves of the ability to influence the situation, whatever that situation is, which is like really, really interesting. I think it's like so incredibly fascinating to think about it that way, and to think about how, when I complain about something, not only am I absolving myself of my own ability to affect that thing and influence it to solve the reason for which I'm complaining about it, but I'm also convincing others as well that it's unsolvable, whatever the thing I'm complaining about is. Really interesting. We'll keep going here. So it's the nature of reactive people to absolve themselves of responsibility. It's so much safer to say I'm not responsible. If I say I am responsible, I might have to say I'm irresponsible. It would be very hard for me to say that I have power to choose my response, and that the response I have chosen has resulted in my involvement in a negative, collusive environment, especially if for years I have absolved myself of responsibility for results in the name of someone else's weaknesses. Oh my gosh. How many people also do that in the name of their own weaknesses as well, right? Absolving themselves of responsibility in their own life in the name of their own weaknesses or habitual circumstances. So these executives focused on finding more information, more ammunition, more evidence as to why they weren't responsible. But this man was proactive toward them too. Little by little, his circle of influence toward them grew also. It contributed to expanding to the extent that eventually no one made any significant moves in the organization without that man's involvement or approval, including the president. But the president did not feel threatened because this man's strength complemented his strength and compensated for his weaknesses. So he had the strength of two people, a complementary team. This man's success was not dependent on his circumstances. Many others were in the same situation. Sorry, my dyslexia at work again. Many others were in the same situation. It was his chosen response to those circumstances, his focus on his circle of influence, that made the difference. There are some people who interpret proactive to mean pushy, aggressive, or insensitive, but that's not the case at all. Gosh, so good, right? That's incredible. It's not the case at all. Proactive people aren't pushy. They're smart. They're value-driven. They read reality, and they know what's needed. Look at Gandhi. When his accusers were in the legislative chambers criticizing him because he wouldn't join in their circle of concerned rhetoric condemning the British Empire for their subjugation of the Indian people, Gandhi was out in the rice paddies, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly expanding his circle of influence with the field laborers. A groundswell of support, of trust, of confidence followed him through the countryside. Though he held no office, this gives me the chills reading this, honestly. Though he held no office or political position, through compassion, courage, fasting, and moral persuasion, he eventually brought England to its knees, breaking political domination of 300 million people with the power of his greatly expanded circle of influence. And that starts with the circle of influence about himself first, right? I want to keep going here, but for me, this is just like, I want to actually touch on something that I'm just feeling in my own life as I'm going about, like, trying to, I'm myself, like that. Why am I doing this study in the way that I'm doing? I'm trying to myself to become a more proactive person. And I view the only way for me to do that is to, one, develop the habit of proactivity, because a proactive person has habits that embody proactivity. And I want to, first off, Stephen Covey's, his definition of a habit is the intersection of knowledge, skill, and desire. So first of all, I have to know what it means to be a proactive person and why. I would have to have a why as to why I would like to be more proactive. Second of all, I have to have the skill set of being able to be proactive. I have to know how, and then I have the ability to make proactive choices, right? And then thirdly, I have to have the desire to be proactive. So I have the desire to be more proactive in my own life. Why do I have that desire? Well, I have that desire because I see the value in being proactive, because I know why I know what it means to be proactive and why, and the influence and the impact that it would have, right? I see it worth becoming proactive, and then gaining the skill set and making that a habit over time. That's actually what makes it a habit. And then that makes you a proactive person as you embody that habit. So I myself am saying, what areas in my life am I relinquishing control over my abilities to influence those areas by complaining about them, by turning a blind eye to them, by just saying, oh, that's how I am, right? What areas in my life am I relinquishing that control? And how do you take that control back? Well, you start with the things you can. You start making choices in small areas in that circle of influence, because if I've relinquished enough control of my own circumstances to the extent that my circle of influence is really tiny, the things in my life that I can influence are so small, all I can do is work within that circle of influence. So let's say the only thing I have control over is when I wake up in the morning. Then that's where I should start, because to the extent that I can gain that confidence in waking up, in owning my ability to wake up on time when I say I'm going to, then that can lead to me having control over the things that I do in the time that I would have been asleep because of my lack of control over that. And then as I make choices that enable me for further and further things within my circle of influence, and I stop caring about those things that don't matter, then my circle of influence grows to the extent that now I can influence other people, and now I can influence organizations. So as I influence myself through the direct control things in my life, then I can start influencing other people through persuasion. And then from there, I can start growing that circle of influence to influence things that are like outside of my own control. And as I choose my own like moods and carry my own weather with me, eventually I might have the ability to even affect that weather or how people respond to it. Kind of an interesting thought, just to, as I've been thinking about that. So let me summarize quickly like what I'm learning today. Let me summarize quickly like the things that I'm learning that I feel most impactful for me for my study. And so I'm going to try to come up with like a thesis statement for my study today. And so, I'm thinking about this on the fly because it helps me if I can summarize it quickly and powerfully, and then it helps me in my ability to influence people to follow these same principles. So my learning from today are like, how do you gain control over the most important aspects of your life so that you can have the ability to influence the results you care about most? Those results can be financial. So like, how do I gain control over my financial life to have what I want? My relationships, how do I gain control over my relationships that matter most to me? Well, it starts with, if you want to increase your ability to influence those things that are most important to you in your life, be they financial, relationships, work, career, ability to serve in your church and community, the way to expand your circle of influence or expand your ability to predict and control the outcomes that you care about most, the way to do that is by focusing on making choices within your direct control things. So like by focusing on making choices over the things that you can control. And so really, if I'm going to summarize that, what I just said, my thesis statement is how do you expand your circle of influence so that you can control the outcomes of your life and the things you care about most, and eventually control larger and larger issues over time, right? How do you expand that circle of influence? Well, the way you do that is by stop relinquishing control to your circumstances or to others in the way that you talk about those things. So if you have no control over a circumstance, stop complaining about it and start making it so that you compensate for the weaknesses of others. And as you do that, as you proactively compensate for the weaknesses of others and proactively see how their strengths synergize with yours, then you increase your circle of influence. And then as you take responsibility for yourself and for where you are in your life and the current results that you have, take responsibility for those, and then seek to control the results of the things in your life, like through direct control, through indirect control, or through no control responses, which is again from 7 Habits. That's the thing that Covey's saying. Then literally you can start to expand your circle of influence such that you have control over like a vast number of things that you didn't when you first started. You can go from being the type of person who struggles to get out of bed in the morning and feels like they have nothing to live for, to having control over all of the things that are worth living for by doing what I just said, which is make small choices within your circle of influence, trust yourself more and more through your ability to make and keep commitments within those things, compensate for the weaknesses of others by being a strength to them that compensates for them, work in harmony with other people, and own the outcomes of your life in such a way that you take responsibility for the future outcomes and you're a part of them. And that's how you make it so that you go from, like I said, like you could go from not wanting to get out of bed in the morning because you feel like you have nothing to live for, to having control over all of the things that are most important to live for, that you care about most. I think that's kind of how I would summarize it. I love the story of Gandhi here. I think it's incredible. So my editors, when we're doing the shorts here, maybe you can do the story of Gandhi, and then the last thing, some version of the last thing that I said that's meaningful and impactful. Anyway, loving this study. This has been awesome. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you on the. If you like this stuff, subscribe, please, and comment some of the things that you like, and I'll see you guys on the next one.